made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
This wasn't just a family disagreement, this was a full-blown royal war exploding behind palace walls, where reputation became a weapon and silence started to look like guilt. Because the moment those first whispers surfaced about Meghan allegedly exploiting royal status for profit, something shifted. Not slowly, not quietly. Instantly, like a match dropped into dry tinder, the entire narrative ignited, and suddenly, Prince William wasn't just watching from a distance anymore, he was being dragged directly into the fire. And here's where it gets unsettling, because the accusations didn't just question Meghan's choices, they challenged the very boundaries of the Sandringham agreement, that carefully crafted exit deal from 2020 that was supposed to draw a clear line between royal duty and private profit. But what if that line wasn't just crossed? What if it was deliberately blurred? That's exactly what began echoing across media platforms when explosive commentary surfaced, accusing Meghan of quietly embedding royal symbols, prestige, and influence into her commercial ventures. Not openly, not obviously, subtly, strategically, almost like a signature hidden in plain sight. The public reaction? Immediate, brutal, relentless. Social media didn't just react, it turned into a courtroom. Every product, every branding choice, every past statement suddenly became evidence. And the question everyone kept circling back to was chillingly simple. If the agreement was so clear, why did reality look so different? That's when William's silence became impossible to ignore, because for days he said nothing. And in a scandal this loud, silence doesn't feel neutral, it feels loaded, calculated, suspicious. Was he waiting, watching, or preparing something far more decisive? Then came the shift. A hard, unmistakable shift. Behind closed doors, pressure was building. Not just public pressure, but institutional pressure. The monarchy itself was being dragged into a narrative it couldn't control. And for William, this wasn't just about headlines anymore. This was about legacy, authority, the future crown. So when he finally responded, it didn't feel like a reaction, it felt like a warning. Because suddenly, the conversation wasn't about branding or media narratives anymore. It was about consequences, real ones, the kind that don't disappear with PR statements or carefully worded interviews, the kind that follow you, legally and publicly. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Instead of retreating, instead of recalibrating, something else happened entirely. Something far more aggressive. Because inside a private space far from cameras, far from public statements, a decision was allegedly being made. Not to defend, not to explain, but to strike back. And the plan? It wasn't subtle. It was bold, risky, almost dangerous in its ambition. Because if the pressure was coming from William, then the only way to survive was to dismantle him. Not physically, not directly, but strategically through narrative, through perception, through public doubt. The kind of doubt that doesn't just question actions, it questions character. Think about that for a second. What happens when the future king's credibility becomes the target? What happens when the narrative flips so completely that the accuser becomes the accused? That's the game that was allegedly being set into motion. A calculated attempt to rewrite the story before it could fully settle, to plant a version of events so explosive that it would force the public to hesitate, to question, to doubt everything they thought they knew. And the centerpiece of that strategy? A claim so precise, so damaging. It could trap William in a contradiction he couldn't easily escape. The suggestion that he knew, that he approved, that behind the scenes he wasn't the outraged heir but a silent participant. If that story landed, everything would change, because suddenly this wouldn't be about Meghan's actions anymore. It would be about William's integrity, his honesty, his right to lead. But here's the problem with stories built on pressure they don't always hold. Because while one side was allegedly preparing a media offensive, the other side was watching, calculating, and waiting for the exact moment to respond. And when that moment came, it wouldn't just challenge the narrative. And just when it seemed like the narrative had reached its peak, when accusations were flying in every direction and the public was struggling to decide who to believe, Prince William didn't just respond, he detonated the entire situation with a move so direct, so uncompromising, it forced the world to stop and reassess everything they had just heard. Because this wasn't a quiet denial. It wasn't a carefully neutral statement designed to calm tensions. It was a full-force rejection, delivered with the weight of future authority behind it. William didn't just deny the claims, he erased them completely and publicly, staking not only his reputation, but his future as king on the truth of his words. And in that moment, something shifted again. The uncertainty that had been hovering in the air, it cracked. The tone changed. The energy changed. And most importantly, the public reaction changed. Because when someone in William's position steps forward and draws a line that clearly invoking legal consequences, not just personal outrage, it doesn't feel like part of the game anymore. It feels final. It feels dangerous. It feels like the kind of move you don't make unless you are absolutely certain of what comes next. And that's exactly what made it so unsettling. Because almost overnight, the tide turned. The same voices that had been questioning William began questioning Meghan. The same platforms that amplified the accusations began dissecting them. And suddenly, the story that was meant to corner William started collapsing in on itself, piece by piece, detail by detail. But then, something happened that no one saw coming. Not a statement, not a rebuttal. Something far more explosive. Inside the Sussex household, behind the privacy of closed doors and controlled narratives, a fracture appeared. A quiet one at first, invisible to the public, but powerful enough to change everything, because someone who had been inside someone who had seen everything reached a breaking point. And when they stepped forward, they didn't come with opinions. They came with evidence. A recording, not rumors, not interpretations, a recording. And the moment it surfaced, the entire story didn't just shift, it shattered. Because suddenly, the alleged strategy that had only been suspected could be heard. Clear, direct, unfiltered, a conversation that painted a completely different picture of what had been happening behind the scenes. A picture that suggested this wasn't just damage control, it was deliberate construction. A narrative being built step by step, designed not to defend, but to dismantle. And the public reaction? It wasn't gradual. It was immediate. Violent, absolute support didn't fade, it collapsed. People who had defended Meghan just days earlier began distancing themselves almost instantly. The same audiences that once questioned William were now questioning everything about the Sussex narrative. Trust didn't weaken, it evaporated. And once that happens, there's no easy way back, because this wasn't just about one claim anymore. It was about credibility. And once credibility cracks, everything attached to it starts falling with it. Meanwhile, William didn't rush. He didn't escalate emotionally. And that silence again felt strategic, because now he didn't need to fight the narrative. The narrative was fighting itself. And then came the final move. Not loud, not chaotic. Controlled, calculated, decisive. William stepped forward not as a brother, not as a public figure under attack, but as the future authority of the monarchy. And what he signaled next wasn't just a reaction to scandal, it was a restructuring of consequences. The kind that doesn't just respond to controversy, but ends it. Discussions, legal pathways, title removals, institutional decisions, words that carry weight far beyond headlines. Because once those processes begin, they don't just affect reputation, they redefine position permanently. And that's where the story stops feeling like gossip and starts feeling like something much bigger. A shift in power, a closing of doors, a line being drawn that can't be stepped back over. But here's the part no one can answer yet. Was this the end of the conflict, or just the moment it went silent before something even bigger unfolds? Because in stories like this, silence is never just silence.